For those who joined only for this session, the idea is to share all your craziest ideas about what we could do in terms of passive acoustic monitoring, and specifically on the signal processing part, because as we have seen with Rachel's presentation, we are facing huge amounts of data. Now, the problem is not to collect the data. The problem is to do something with it, and to do something that is ecologically relevant. So we have a few tools in our toolbox. We have the acoustic indices. We have automatic sound detection and signal processing. So I guess now, what do you think we should? What are the next steps for this to be easier and more faster to implement for maybe for ecologists who don't necessarily have a background in computer science or a big background, or even for engineers, because it's still a big problem for a lot of people to just get the interesting ecological data out of it. So feel free to raise your hand and share your ideas. I'm trying to look at the chat to see what was going on.
Camille, I'm not sure how to raise my hand. I can't find the icon.
Then just start speaking. Feel free to.
Okay, I just wanted also to say thank you everyone for the messages and the questions, and I hope we can continue the discussion through mail or in other spaces. About what you're saying, I think something, because I'm an engineer, I know also I've studied also ecology, and I think maybe the first part to develop new tools and all this is really to understand what are the main information that we need from this audio data. Really understand at the different ecological levels. Okay, at the community, at the soundscape level, what do we need? Do we need only the biophony, geophony, and anthropophony? Something else? Do we need at the community level? What do we need? Number of species or what? And at the population level, what do we need? If we have very specific question like targets, it will be much easier also for the engineers to develop the tools to address these targets. And I think that could be the start of this discussion also.
Let them know that a new tool is ready to go.
A new tool, a new poll. There.
Poll.
So in between this, we will also do a poll about. So just it will show up in your screen, and you can answer it. And it will be about what it will be about.
The favorite fauna group for bioacoustic monitoring.
So what is your taxonomy, the taxonomy group that you are working on? And in the meantime, we had a question from Laura. I don't know if you want to ask your question. Maybe otherwise we go with David and then Laura.
Yeah, so this might be in part a kind of a generational thing, but like I definitely enjoy learning new software tools, troubleshooting and playing around with like, a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino or that kind of stuff. But it really does feel like for a lot of ecologists, especially people who might be a little bit further along in their careers and have kind of gotten their training before a lot of these sensors and packages were first developed, like there's a real need for stuff that kind of just works like right off the shelf, that has as close to zero kind of learning curve as possible, so that like that there's all these kind of really fascinating developments coming out of people doing really cool stuff with like Raspberry Pis and kind of different things, and then these really cool Python or R packages, but like a lot of people don't want to bother with that stuff. I know this because I've talked to some of them, and so I think there's a real need for, like, in terms of engineers developing tools, for like a strong focus on the kind of UI UX side of things. I think some kind of groups and products have done a really good job of that, like the Arbimon people, I think, have done a really good job with their UI. But there's also a lot of stuff that's just like, right, we're all kind of doing this on a volunteer basis, and designing that stuff carefully can take a lot of time and is a thing that people pay a lot of money for in industry. And I just think that that's something that as a community we need to focus on a little bit more if we want to kind of spread adoption of just like how do you make this easy for people who don't want to deal with any kind of like scripting or command line.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good point, because that's something that a lot of people who are new to passive acoustic monitoring kind of ask, and are surprised to discover that it doesn't exist the way that as easy as we could think it would be in at this time. So yeah, really good point. But maybe also the thing is, we always need a dialogue between ecologists and engineers who could be developing these tools. As you mentioned, one is super important to make sure that we include the community that we're working for, sort of, because that's who, when you develop tools, you want to make sure that people will use them and that they will be useful for what people want to do. So with I'm reading the chat. The question for Laura was to whether there is any chance of getting a workshop on Juan to teach this tool. Juan has already done a workshop for Spain a while, like 2 years ago maybe. So, and yeah, so I guess you can ask Juan to tell you what. And yeah, Juan, you have your hand up, so feel free to say.
Okay, yes, but I'm not sure if there's anyone that wants to speak before me. No?
Right now, no hand up. So go ahead.
Okay. And I just wanted to, yes, I think to give an answer to what David was saying. I think it's, yes, the target is to make tools much more easy for ecologists to use. But I'm kind also, I'm afraid of making tools that are so easy that people just use them blindly. And it's very important to understand what's behind, because you will have patterns and you can interpret this in your own way, but you can make some very large assumptions, and at the end you don't have the you have base data that does not lead you to correct interpretations. So I think these kind of tools that are very easy to use have also some drawbacks, which are these kind of drawbacks. And what I really like about coding is that you can make reproducible science. You leave your code and anyone, anywhere can reproduce it and find bugs or improve or find any kind of mistakes. So this is also something that we thought about when we were developing math, to make something that you have to use in lines of code, but because it can be much more reproducible. So this is just a thought.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think absolutely making sure science is reproducible is a huge.
And just to complete, sorry, Camille, is that yes, I think what we have to build are teams with engineers and ecologists. I think yes, you cannot have a one-man band that does everything. You need this diverse teams working on these questions and on this kind of research.
So we have a poll going on. So tell us what your favorite animal is for bioacoustics. And so I had one question for all of you, for the group. One thing that I've been wondering about for a while now is whether we should register our in advance what we will do with the data that we are collecting. You know, like give a clear plan of what we are planning to do in terms of processing. I don't know if anyone has maybe experience with that, or when they are building a project, or thoughts on that. So anyone can raise their hand or open your mic. I mean, I feel like we can. There is not so many people speaking at the same time, so feel free to start.
Hello Camille. Jérôme. I'm not sure to what you mean. What do you mean that we share the project that we plan to do so that there is no kind of duplication, or?
Hi, Jerome. I think your connection is maybe very breaking up a bit, and your voice is very low. I don't know if people can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, without the video, is it better?
It's a bit better.
It's better. Sorry. Sorry. Just to be sure to understand what you said. What do you? What is the idea? That we share what we plan to do before to do it, so that there is no duplication of the project?
Yeah, and also just to make a plan about the type of processing that we are planning to do, just to, for example, make sure that it's feasible, that we will have the data to do this, or
okay, so that that's the kind of discussion I pre-program discussion share your other if it or not. Well, why not? So that you could do that with maybe some discussion list or something like that with an appropriate tool. But why not? Yes, of course. But I have no experience with that actually. It's it's not that common to see that in science because actually the process of thinking about the sampling is very important in research. So that's something that is usually done internally, but that doesn't mean that it should not be done externally actually, and to benefit from the experience of others. Yes. Mm.
Okay.
Another pool is going.
So, I'm sorry.
Another pool is going.
A new one is good. Thank you, Magali. Thank you, Jerome. It was a bit hard to hear what you said, but I guess it's the discussion we need to open. And so, and anyone else has a thought? I saw some comments and okay, Eve, you can jump in.
Yeah, just a comment about what was discussed this morning about the targets we may have on the when doing some acoustic monitoring. So in my experience, I mainly worked on bat monitoring, and we had some good experience at monitoring bats together with other taxa, such as bush crickets, for example. And because bush crickets were not very popular, or there were not enough funding to do some specific monitoring on those, it was quite good to do some common protocols for bats and bush crickets. And but we are now experiencing on the other side the fact that it is pretty to, so there is a new community building on the nocturnal bird migration, so monitoring with acoustics some birds migration, and it is quite difficult to build a common protocol for bats and nocturnal bird migration because we are mainly, for many reasons, but one is kind of technical, is that for ultrasound monitoring, you spend a lot more energy and memory consumption because it's a high sampling rate recording. So we need to do trigger recordings, so not record all the time. On the contrary, for nocturnal bird migration, people need to do continuous recordings because they want to detect quite rare events where with the quite often very small signal to noise ratio, so trigger is not very efficient. So my point, just that something could be discussed, is that there was this open question about whether we should produce common protocols for a lot of taxa. I think we should identify some groups that could be monitored together and some groups that could not. In that way, we can, I think, identify some interesting trade-off to produce a limited number of monitoring protocols for, at least for terrestrial biodiversity. So, I don't know if I'm clear about it, but I think the question about the fact that whether we should standardize or not depends on the taxa we target.
Yeah, good point. I think you're right. There are some some species where it's easy to have some sort of a common protocol, but some species where it's almost impossible. Yeah. So very interesting point. Thank you. Trying to catch up on the chat. If anyone wants to jump in, feel free to do so. And
Would that help if we're having a new pool about what the people prefer between Python and that the ecologists are willing to jump into Python?
that's the question now is that are you convinced you're supposed to learn Python now?
Yeah, I really would like to know if that would help the last speaker to make that type of.
If so, yeah, thank you everyone for this discussion. I think if there is no more points you want to make, we can close this open discussion. I just want to thank again the two presenters for this session, Rachel and PAM. Thank you very much. I also want to thank the other presenters from this morning. Big thank you for all your participation, of all the people who showed up and gave their craziest ideas, shared their craziest ideas with us. Yeah, thank you very much. And we will be in touch for sharing some of the chats, because there was a lot of interesting documents that were shared in the chat. So if you want to see that again, we will be sharing it. And we will also be sharing the recordings of the talks. So we'll be in touch to let you know where we're sharing them next week. But we will probably upload them to YouTube or something like that for those who missed part of the day. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Céline, for hosting the conference. And yeah, if there